Let's say you're talking with an indie developer. What do you wish like every indie developer would know when it comes to marketing a game?
One of the most important ways for you to build fandom or hype around your game is obviously to have a good product, but it's to have people empathize with the story that you're trying to tell. People buy people, they buy into human stories.
Today I'm joined by a marketing strategist who spent over a decade in the games industry. Joe has worked with esport giants like Optic Gaming, global platforms like Meta and Riot Games, and big studios like Blizzard and Supercell. And now he's head of gaming and partnership at Once Upon a Time, a creative agency helping studios cut through the noise. At some point, you're going to run out of cash, so you need to launch. But I'm guessing we all would wish we do a little more marketing, a little more development, but at some point you need to pick a day and then go for it.
There's this kind of obsession with Q4. You're trying to hit festive buying periods, and I think that a lot of that is institutionalized from when the industry was more reliant on physical copies. Helldivers and a couple of others have really done well by looking at late Jan, early February as a really quiet time.
We talk about what effectiveness in games marketing actually means, why most launches are backwards, and how to balance data with gut instinct to create work that moves the needle.
For dev cycles of multiple years, which is super common, if you're trying to ride a trend that was really popular 3 or 4 years ago and then your game comes out, the market will have moved. So there's a big roll of the dice and risk for chasing trends when you can't keep up with where the attention is.
From Dallas to London, esports to agency, and now an advisory board member at Great Ormond Street Hospital, this is the Games Marketing Playbook with Joe Hill. Joe, welcome to the show.
Thank you for having me. Very nice to be here.
Very excited for this conversation. So you've been at Blizzard, Supercell, Meta, Riot Games, also even been a headhunter for Optic Games esports back in the day. And now you're at a very interesting business, which is interesting. I've got a marketing service agency, but you're like kind of the big full service agency. I was like, how do they actually work once you get to that scale? But I feel like you've been in so many different places answering kind of the same issue. So yeah, really excited to get into today's chat. So for everyone at home, games marketing effectiveness, we'll be covering 3 things, kind of like how long should we market and why. Second thing is kind of gut instinct versus data. They're both of a place, but how do we manage it? And then how do we actually get creative on a repeatable basis without it kind of like hoping for it to happen? So I want to start, Joe, with kind of why do you think there's this obsession with like launch day? And I feel like studios are missing the bigger picture. Like you were saying before we started recording, how like people underestimate how long they can market. So I want to ask you, why do people obsess over launch day?
Well, I think a lot of the time, games companies, if they're larger, will feel a lot of pressure with regards to their own run rate or investor expectations on when that big influx of new revenue is going to hit the annual report. Smaller studios don't have a lot of budget either, so it's always kind of an opportunity cost of, if we don't go now, when will we, and will we have some time to finish? You're kind of looking at the state of games funding as well in the space at the moment. There's just not a lot of proactive investment out there at the moment, so it is quite challenging. There's a lot of pressure in a very demanding market. So
curious, when you worked at these different companies, right? So you've worked at Supercell, worked at Blizzard. I'm guessing all of these studios approach marketing differently. What do you find is like a big misconception every time you join into a new studio? Like people don't actually understand like what's happening behind the scenes when it comes to marketing.
Yeah, I mean, in the size and scope of businesses that I've worked in, the cultures have been completely different. So Supercell and how Blizzard will approach bringing a game to market will be completely different. An esports org will market itself in a completely different way as well. So there are lots of factors that come into it. If you're working in a AAA environment, you're not just trying to speak to your core audience that you've already identified through research, and maybe it's a pre-existing franchise. You're going out to a variety audience that might be closer to some of the themes of your games. You're trying to crack it to mass market. So then the attention game is not just against other games that have released, it's against film, it's against entertainment, it's about people's time spent on their phone. So those are a completely different set of challenges to smaller indie teams that are just trying to get some form of attention with their hardest of hardcore audience. So yeah.
So touching on that, like marketing launch day, right? So
Hmm.
let's role play. Like I'm thinking in today's market, I'm bootstrapping, right? I have X
Yeah.
amount of money. I want to launch my game. And you raised an interesting point. I wanted to ask you on it. Like at some point, you're going to run out of cash. So you need to launch at some time. But I'm guessing we all would wish we do a little more marketing, a little more development. But at some point, you need to pick a day and then
Yeah.
go for it. Like let's say you're talking with an indie developer or like the indie developers that you have spoken to. Like what do you wish like every indie developer would know when it comes to kind of marketing a game?
Yeah, I think one of the most important ways for you to build fandom or hype around your game is obviously to have a good product, but it's to have people empathize with the story that you're trying to tell. So people buy people, they buy into human stories. It's why people listen to podcasts. It's why people love kind of BTS videos or dev diaries. I think what Baldur's Gate 3 did really well was putting their voice talent kind of front and center and letting their huge fandom and creative abilities kind of speak for the team as a whole. For indie studios specifically, if you're going into early access, obviously you're going to have a longer time in market. So you might have a playable version of the game out there for over a year. Maintaining the engagement, having new content, either in game or out of game, through pieces of content that are going to tell your story, I think is really important. Also, trying to look at from a paid media perspective, when are some of the quieter moments that you can try to get a share of voice in is going to be
When
key
are the
as well.
quieter moments?
Well, I think for next year, it's whenever GTA is not going to
Not
be,
coming up.
and you've seen some really kind of interesting shifts with people realizing it now. There's a more of an open goal at the end of this year, so some people are trying to rush through
It's funny because like
some launches. Yeah,
for like for people listening, right? GTA 6 was scheduled already for this year, and
yeah,
understand that a lot of $1 million decisions were made about the fact that that's happening. So like
yeah,
launch dates were changed, and then GTA 6 was like, oh, actually next year, and then everyone's like, oh shit. um,
yeah.
but could that happen again next year? I doubt it because it's a big move. But like, is that something where everyone should actually like? Are you doing that with your clients right now? Like, okay, we have GTA 6 window and then non GTA 6 window. Is that a conscious
Yeah,
decision people should make?
I mean, I think some of the larger franchises have definitely tried to get out of the way of that because, from like a culture bomb perspective, a GTA will be the biggest entertainment moment of the last 10 years. I mean, I've spent reportedly over $1 billion in game dev, and the largest studios themselves will normally spend the same they will on marketing as they will for game dev themselves. So it's going to be
Mad.
inescapable as a cultural moment. Um, but for smaller studios, I actually think there's this kind of obsession with Q4. You know, you're trying to hit um, festive buying periods, and I think that a lot of that is maybe institutionalized from when the industry was more reliant on physical copies. If you've seen Helldivers, which I wouldn't call an indie game, but Helldivers and a couple of others have really done well by looking at late Jan, early February as a really quiet time where a lot of other franchises are asleep, and there's still avid players either on PC, console, or mobile that are still looking for something new to play. So I think being a little bit selective and extending that if you can, so that you're giving yourself the best bet because you can only spend the money once, right? So make it work harder for you. And then there are some tactical things like media slots will be cheaper outside of Q4 and other areas as well. So yeah.
Cool. I want to zoom out for a second, Joe. So you've been marketing games for 10 years, right? So like, I'm sure things that have happened 10 years ago versus 5 years ago versus now is completely different. And I was curious, like, what's your gaming habits right now? Because this became a debate on every podcast I've done. It's like, I'm like the worst type of gamer where if a game's too good, I won't play it because I have no time. And
Yeah.
I would pretty much only play if it's on mobile and also roguelike because otherwise I feel like I'm not doing any work. And then if I'm ever doing any game that isn't that, it needs to be social. Otherwise, what's the point? And then I'm like, okay, wait a minute. Like the amount of games that are left is pretty much the
Yeah.
big platform games, at least for me, or like this indie roguelike. I'm wondering, like, what do you play games? Are you playing much right now?
Yeah. I've been playing far too much for far too long. So I grew up in a small family with no brothers or sisters. So multiplayer games from a community and from a competition standpoint were a place where I found my people, and then the kind of immersive story and single player games like Metal Gear Solid 2 were some of the formative experience for me with games as a medium, where you could have some agency in the story. Like, I think only books and maybe chess is the sort of entertainment where you have a choice in the story because you're making the picture in your mind with books. But when it comes to streaming or YouTube or doom scrolling, it's a passive brain off experience. Um,
Mm.
I spent the first half of my career in esports. Wasn't necessarily marketing the games; it was more kind of marketing the players that were playing the games and trying to build a commercial proposition around those teams or those leagues where the players were playing. And back then, I was all about the kind of big platform games. So I've got, I don't know, a 2,000 plus hours in League. The same in Dota. I don't know why I played both, but I did.
Okay. That's probably
CS:GO.
unique. I haven't heard that before.
Yeah, I started off in League and then went to Dota because I realised that it is frankly a superior title.
Ooh.
Sorry, everyone. And then was kind of huge into FPS games as well. So CS:GO and a bunch of others. But nowadays, as what happens as you get a bit older and you have less time, and your time is taken up with a small puppy and and other things. I find that I'm in a really unique spot at the moment where I'm playing more games but for shorter time. So I've got a couple of roguelikes like you. So loved the launch of Nine Kings by Hooded Horse earlier on this year. Was absolutely obsessed with that. Playing Mecha Bellum, which is like a turn-based grid strategy game by Dreamhaven. And then I kind of flex between a couple of games of Hunt Showdown, a couple of games of Undisputed, which is the boxing title made by Steel City Interactive, and then whatever my mates will play as well. So absolutely agree with you. It's the stuff that's going to engage me for shorter sessions now, and then if I can play socially with people, because that it just becomes like a backdrop for just memeing with your friends, basically.
Joe, you mentioned something there where you have the fact that like players are changing. I feel anyway. I see this anecdotally, but like I also see it on the outside. If we ignore mobile for a second, like the games that are doing well tend to be an Among Us, something that's really streamable or social, or for me, a roguelike where you can speedrun it, or there's like a leaderboard of some kind and you can't necessarily finish the game. And
Yep.
then you have the platform games. I'm wondering how are you seeing this in marketing now? Because if you market a game saying it's got hundreds of hours of content and it's got all of this, all of that, but it doesn't have the social aspect or it's not really streamable, then I don't see how that game can be marketed in today's world. I don't know if you've seen that in like a marketing campaign that's doing well versus a game that didn't do well because of the marketing. Have you seen anything like that where you think is a good example?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's hard to make broader trend points about why people play what they play because there are so many different games and so many
Mm.
different players that people play for a whole bunch of different motivational reasons. The kind of underpinning for us whenever we go into audience strategy or go to market work is we try to identify what the player motivations would be when they're kind of associated with that game to start off with. So for a more competitive title, you've got mastery, you've got competition. For story player games, you've got immersion and kind of self-actualization with the power fantasy. Increasingly, there are more cozy games, which I see a lot of discussion around. Is a cozier genre, and why is it not on Steam? Because there are relaxing games and all kinds of different stuff within that category. But people play for a whole bunch of different reasons. I play different games at different times of the day based on what I need. A lot of people I know kind of read different books based on, like they'll have multiple books in rotation based on what they need out of it at the moment. But I think we definitely saw from COVID, there was a huge kind of boom of the 4-player social game where you're live reacting with VoIP, and you see it again with Peak recently, absolutely smashing it at such an accessible kind of price point. The simplicity, farming of clips of people kind of leaping to grab their friend's hand and falling to their deaths. It was, I think, in terms of the virality of those games, like that feature's never going to go away, as something that's going to drive a lot of traction. But you're mainly seeing a lot of kind of mixing on themes as well. So roguelikes, for example, lots of different genres are kind of mixing into that, just with like a larger replayability loop.
So when you're looking at your clients, I wonder, could you quickly explain like what, because you mentioned before the podcast, like what Once does, right? It's a full service agency. Like what does your actual day-to-day look like? Just a quick 60-second, just so people can understand.
Yeah, so Once Upon a Time is a full service strategic agency for games. So the kind of USP for us is a big planning and strategy toolkit that we've built that kind of addresses questions that game devs might have. So we'll go from a top-down perspective, where we'll go from market segmentation data, we'll go kind of bottom up from the community insights, and then we'll go from the side with some AI tools that will look at trailers, we'll look at storefronts, we'll look at key art and say what's standing out from those pieces of creative. So essentially, whenever we're looking at how can we make our budget go further for a launch, how can we drive a more like effective partnerships pipeline is one of the things that we're working a lot on at the moment, or how can we find our audience? That's the general process that we go through. And for frankly, like the licenses for these tools are quite expensive, so we kind of democratize access out to smaller studios by having them in house, and then the strategy work normally brings some really interesting recommendations for us for the marketing campaign, and hopefully we get to work with the studios when it comes to the creative work as well. So yeah, that's the general kind of USP. We work across indies and larger studios as well. Just to give you a sample of some of the clients that we work with, it's PlayStation, Team 17, 5 Live Studios out of Australia, Blumhouse Games, the film studio known for so many awesome horror films, and a bunch of others as well.
So if you allow me, I'd like to role play an indie developer, because you're mentioning, because you said like there's interesting strategies coming out, and I'm thinking for the person listening to this, right, they want to market their game better or know how marketing works in general. So when you say you have tools and those tools help you recommend different strategies in marketing, I'm just coming back to what you said earlier about like Peak has a built-in, I guess, phenomenon with the game is that it allows for clipping, it allows for social content. Is that something that the marketing team is supposed to be thinking about, or is that more the development side? Because I feel like when you identify that in a game, then you want to like pour gasoline on it, but like in a paid manner. Like for example, going on a bit of a tangent here, but like the Peak thing, it's kind of like it's happening anyway. But I know like Landfill games specifically, they've done that on their previous games, right? All of their games have an element of, that would be a crazy funny clip somewhere. Yeah. I'm wondering, is that the marketing team's job? It's like, okay, is this game going to give us something that we can then turn into kind of more raw gameplay behind the scenes or whatnot? Like if you're an indie developer, when should you start thinking about that?
Well, I think it's a good question. I don't think you can force you can't force an RPG to be like a multiplayer game with VoIP just because that's what's going to bang on social media. So you have to be authentic towards the kind of core of the story that you're trying to tell. I do think it's more on the devs, because they should be leading like what the identity of that game should be. And it's probably marketing's responsibility to help with, when it comes to product market fit, to understand actually what we're making at the moment. Is that gonna cut the mustard? Is that going to stand out enough? So that's how we kind of use some of the tools that I mentioned. These tools, just go into a bit more detail, will be...
Yeah, it would be good, because if someone's high level, like they haven't heard of these tools, they don't want to spend money right now, like is there anything high level they could just keep in mind?
Yeah, so there's kind of global audience surveys like GWI, YouGov, Newzoo, which you can kind of go after, and we have a couple of those that will basically help you work out who, where, how many players are there around specific genres, and then what they're passionate about. So you can find over-indexing points that you can start to build into your marketing campaign. So you may, from like a partnerships perspective, you may find that, I don't know, for like an FPS game, a more hardcore FPS game like a Hell Let Loose, there might be, unsurprisingly, a really strong interest in history, but also in audio content. So you can start to play around with, actually, this gives us a really clear way in. For some of the shoulder content we might want to include, some of the partners that we might want to work with, and how we can build some content that's going to be really authentic to our players. For an indie studio, I think a lot of smaller teams that are making a game, they don't always necessarily have someone who has necessarily a commercial head or a marketing soul. They might just be really passionate about what they're trying to make. And that's why you're seeing there's more agencies that are kind of helping with co-publishing these days. There's a lot more smaller publishers that are spinning out to kind of help on that journey. And agencies like us can also kind of plug in to fill the gap when it comes to starting off from strategy. What do you really know about your players, and who you think that your game is for? Are we able to kind of validate from a source of truth who these people are, where we see the opportunity in terms of size and scale? That then gives us a sense of truth, mutual truth, when we're speaking with our clients, that can then inform those kind of creative decisions. So there's been a couple of projects recently where we started off getting a trailer brief. We just need X, Y, and Z on this specific timeline. Please, can you do this for the amount of budget that we have? And then when we work out if that's feasible, then we say yes, and then we go from there. But as we're going into the trailer process, we'll do some audience work just to make sure that we're on the same page as our client. That normally informs some really interesting things with regards to social amplification. So you can look at what the cut downs will be from that trailer. What are the other really quite low-hanging fruit things that you can create around what your audience is interested in, and then it kind of informs what you'd put some paid media behind afterwards. I think a lot of marketing decision making in games is made on gut instinct, based on, we're making an action RPG, we should target Hades players. But a lot of the time, if people are playing Hades already, that's one of the best games in the category. Why would they play yours that's got like a third of the budget, and doesn't have the same name recognition value, right? So you've got to find something different, and something unique to say in your campaign if you really want to cut through, in my opinion.
So you mentioned a point there, like the trailer itself is kind of like that hero asset, but you're saying you're doing audience work and then finding potentially in this trailer, what could we have and be smaller pieces and then put like paid money behind that. Like for me, that's something where I don't imagine the developers thinking those steps ahead, but like, should they? I'm just trying to think, like, are they at the mercy of the agency at this point? Like, I'm just really trying to champion for the indie developer listen to this. Like, what questions should they be asking? Maybe that's a good question here. So like, what questions should an indie developer be asking their marketeer, their agency, to get the most out of the project?
Yeah, well, I would ask the question internally first, so that you get on the same page with your team. Like, what is the game that we're making? What are the 3 core kind of gameplay pillars that we really believe are core to this experience? And who do we think our players are? Sticking to your rule of 3s. These are like three questions that you should be on the same page with in your team, that enable you to give a good brief. An agency can then go and take those assumptions and those ambitions and validate those with data in our position. And then when you're going into the creative process for a trailer, you can make sure that those pillars are communicated. Ultimately, a trailer it's a vibe test, it's an eye test, but it's also a subconscious menu for what players can buy into with your experience. So, for example, if you're building a trailer for a very cozy title with furry animals where you can dress them up and you can craft, and it's very like wholesome. There are some really interesting themes around kind of customization, relaxation, and almost mental health around that kind of game title, which you can play with. And the complete opposite will be if you're working with a horror title where you'll want to be driving as much suspense. You'll use completely different music to make people as uncomfortable as possible. And normally in a horror title, there's mystery. So you want to entice enough, but without spoiling the twist or something. So there's different challenges for different titles. But for smaller studios, I know what you're making. Who do you think it's for? And what are the 3 things that you're trying to have in your game that like are unique to you? And if you can start there, then you'll be off to a good start.
Cool. I want to take you back to when you worked kind of in industry instead of in the service industry. Like, I'm guessing you've worked with other agencies and whatnot, and you probably worked with some good ones, some less good. I'm wondering, how did you determine like who to work for? If you're an indie developer and you don't have that marketeer in-house, the commercial head, then you're kind of, it's a very big decision, I feel, like choosing who you work with. So how did you make that decision back then?
Yeah. With larger studios, so with Blizzard, it was more complicated. We had some historical relationships, and once the Microsoft acquisition kind of went through, there was some, looking at the agencies that you have been using locally versus what those global contracts will look like. That's just an entire kind of a different beast that I'll leave to the side. But I think evaluating an agency is exactly the same as looking at a new game as a game scout, as making a new contact on LinkedIn, as meeting someone in your personal life. You kind of go on reputation, and you go on vibe, and then you go on credentials as well. So leading into good case studies, trying to reach out to people who might have worked with that agency before to actually see what the experience was like. Luckily, gaming is a really small industry still, despite the fact that it's kind of bigger than film, music, and TV combined. So yeah, I think you can get a pretty decent read on someone that you're speaking to through going around and asking quite quickly. One question that I would always ask and have had asked of me, and now I've been agency side, is like everyone's in the business of saying what they're good at, but asking the question, what aren't you good at, I think can always throw people for a loop. I was actually in a client meeting this week and someone asked me that, and was very, very clear that we work with a great partner for PR, which is Plan of Attack, who've been in the space for 20 years. So for us specifically, PR isn't something that we can help with, and we don't manage any influencers specifically. So that's also in kind of Plan of Attack's wheelhouse. So if people can't confidently answer the question around what they don't do well, and then they might be spinning you for a yarn, or they might not just be the kind of best the best actors. So yeah,
Like, it's similar to hiring someone, I'd imagine, right?
absolutely. Yeah, I mean, rolling the dice on a hire. You're like you employ someone based on like 3 or 4 hours of interview experience and kind of looking at a CV. Like it's,
and then you're making a judgment, right?
Yeah, and there's no, and you have no idea what the kind of pros and cons of that person are going to be when you work in stressful situations, when they're challenged, when a client puts them on the spot, or you have no idea of their propensity to completely surprise you in a brainstorm, or have some form of insight into a game that you've just never heard of. I've got a really talented team at once of people that kind of live and breathe the space, and there's quite a lot of crossover in the games that we play, but it's also they can play completely different stuff. So in a couple of projects, we'll be going into a genre that I've got no experience of, and there'll be one person in the team who's played 300 hours of a very similar title, and it's just really helpful to lean on them too. So yeah, it's the same process. It's a roll of the dice, but I think you can mitigate that risk through looking for recommendations, seeing what the other kind of companies are that they work with, and have they kept working with them as well. If you've got a bunch of like one-off projects and people haven't wanted to do more with them, then that's might be a sign that things didn't go the best.
Yeah. Well, you can probably just ask them as well, right? Like,
yeah, for sure.
Why have they not come back?
Yeah.
Then you can probably viable. I have a question here because I have a marketing agency and we can't control the outcome. We can control
Yeah.
how good the trailer is, but
Yeah.
then what if in this universe you did everything right as a marketing agency, but it didn't cut through? But as a developer, I mean, how can I understand whether it's the agency's fault or not? And I think this also ties back into having someone on your team. Like, if something isn't performing, when do you quote unquote give up on that person or agency versus is that something that we need to do and do differently? Because I feel like that's something that comes up quite often in the games industry and life. But I found like when it comes to marketing games, it's such a high failure rate. How do you know they're failing because it's just like an execution problem or it's just like a it happens problem?
I think when you look at founders of companies, most people will kind of fail multiple times in a row before they find something that hits. We all fail more than, well, we all learn more from our failures than we do when we succeed in life. So that's not really answering the question, but I think when it comes to, is it an agency? Is it the agency's responsibility? Is it the marketing team's responsibility? Is it the dev's responsibility? That there are going to be a lot of things that you can't control based on what other games come out at the same time. For dev cycles of multiple years, which is super common, if you're trying to ride a trend that was really popular 3 or 4 years ago, and then your game comes out, like a lot of this kind of battle royale extraction shooter stuff, the market will have moved. So there's a big roll of the dice and risk for chasing trends when you can't keep up with where the attention is. I think this is why something like Rematch from Kepler is such a great example of people having a really clear vision of understanding the sports genre. Football games have always been the same. It's just been how can we replicate and make the experience as real as possible. And that has led to it, I think, being quite stale over the years. It's been super over monetized by the major studios as well. Kepler saw a huge opportunity based on the success with Sifu. They believed in their ability to make a game that was compelling from a mechanical standpoint, and they wanted to make a big bet themselves to do something completely different and make a kind of maximum 5v5 mechanics heavy football game, which is a complete kind of left field option from them. So I think trying to do something unique that you actually believe in rather than chasing trends is going to lead to you being more successful. But in terms of like who takes responsibility for if things are successful or not, you need to have good and clear and realistic expectations on what you're looking to get out of whenever you're working with a team member, with an agency, or with any other partner. These need to be like grounded in facts. They can't be aspirational or just what you'd like to happen.
What I'm thinking about here is, what if they're not performing? When do you let them go? Have you ever had any experience where something's not happening, whether it's a team member and it's just not performing, and you kind of give them another chance? Do you let them go? Because I feel like if every time something doesn't perform and you quote unquote stop with the agency or let them go, and then you're not learning, right? Yeah, but it's also a balance where you can't just be insane and do the same thing over and over again. But I feel like that's a difficult decision to make. Do you have any points on that?
Yeah, I've been lucky that the only time I ever had to be involved in making someone redundant was with my own company, LFG. He'd been kind of part-time as someone helping me from a researcher perspective, and I took the responsibility fully on myself for his failure because he was working remote a couple of days a week, and I was completely all encompassed with what I thought I need to do with the job, which was to be kind of super new biz focused and outreach focused. So he wasn't. I didn't have the time or the willingness to put in the time required to get him up to speed to the level that I wanted. I think I also hired someone expecting them to be like an exact clone of me, working exactly the same way as me, and be able to just do what I needed them to, which I think was completely unrealistic. So going back to my previous point on making sure the expectations are clear, I think is really important. From a performance with agencies, you should have ROI in mind for anything that they're doing. If it's a trailer where there's no like marketing KPIs like attached to it, if they go over budget hugely, then then they're not doing their job, so don't work with them again. If from like a media perspective, if they're promising you the world with regards to wish lists and impressions and they're not delivering, have very clear questions as to asking them why they didn't happen. And I don't think you're obligated to keep working with a team member or with a third party. Like if you're not happy, so that there should be natural forms of escalation in there to have those conversations as well. But I feel like I've kind of inadvertently started having like a conversation about people management in an industry where like, I don't know, 60,000 people have been laid off in the last 3 years, which is definitely not where I wanted to kind of be pontificating, because I have huge, like, I've been impacted either directly or indirectly by layoffs in the last 5 roles that I've been in, and it's hugely emotionally taxing for those that survive and for those that actually get laid off. So my heart goes out to everyone who's experienced that, and I hope that the industry can find a better, more consistent flow in the course of the next few years. But it doesn't look like that's happening at the moment, which is really sad.
Yeah, it's not fun. Just thinking to close off here for people who, in that situation, there's some people who listen to this who may be looking for their next gig, their first gig, an upgrade, and just double clicking on what you just said, right? You've kind of gone through this cycle more times than most. Like, any advice to Joe 5 cycles ago? Like, what would they could have done differently, or anything in your career you can speak on?
I would say, first of all, that being made redundant isn't a judgment on your value and who or your worth as a person. I think, especially in bigger companies, these decisions are made 1,000 miles and many layers above where you may be sitting, and you might just be a number on the page. Like I know with the kind of larger studio stuff, like no one's thinking about the individuals that are impacted. The number just needs to go down from like a headcount perspective, and that's just how it is. And you can feel completely powerless in that situation. If you're in a startup environment and there's kind of inherent unpredictability, then I think preparing yourself and being ready and making sure that you have short-term goals where you can really feel like you're tracking your experiences and growing in that role is important, so that you can have things that you can take away. I would have probably told a younger version of myself to share how I was feeling more to people that were close to me, because I think people's career can be a huge source of pride, and then when it's not outwardly looking like it's going well because of instability, you can start to kind of internalize that worth and that status stuff. And just like anything with mental health, I think just talking about it and sharing it and airing it out rather than having it echo within your brain is probably a much kind of healthier way to go about it. I also think that green banner on LinkedIn, it's an opportunity. In a way, there are thousands of people that are in a similar situation to you that would normally be far too busy to have a conversation with you now. So if you are laid off, don't necessarily just focus on kind of reaching out to people if they have a job or they're hiring. Like, you never know where people are going to end up. We've actually been, like, for the events that we've been organizing, very kind of informal drinks and that sort of thing, we've been inviting a bunch of people that aren't currently employed. One, because they're super talented, great people that have interesting things to say, but also very selfishly in the future, like, you never know where they're going to end up, and if they are great, then they will no doubt have another great role within the industry, and you're one of the few people that actually gave them a time of day and some support in a hard time. So it's just about building relationships when it comes to that sort of thing as well. But
Yeah, no, I've definitely seen that in my life as well. And I think it's a very good point. Back in my recruitment job, the biggest way we met new people was through the podcast. We did roundtables, and if someone was just really interesting, doesn't matter if they were working at the time, where like a recruitment company, selfishly, we should probably speak to people who are hiring. But to your point, sometimes it's going to be a good conversation. And guess what? After 6, 12 months, things happen. They either move to a new business or they just might meet someone who needs your help. And if we take this back to the job hunting scenario, I did a podcast earlier today with John Wright, and he mentioned how someone from cybersecurity was trying to join the games industry and was struggling how. And basically, it was just a translation problem. He had to translate his cybersecurity experience into what the market's needing right now. But he would never know how to do that unless he just speaks to someone who's in the industry. And if you're struggling to get a reply or feedback from a company, then you can get it from someone who's either recently been working or what have you. And I think it's just a win-win. So like having more conversations, not less, definitely is a big factor.
Yeah, I 100% agree. I met John for the first time a few months ago at a mobile event. Big energy, and I'm really excited to see what he can do as CEO in his new role.
Yeah, we had a great conversation today. He's very interesting guy because he doesn't have to do anything with the way he set up his business, which I feel like means he's going to do different things than versus what like it's actually happened, let's say, for other similar companies. Beautiful. So I want to end on this point. So like based on this conversation today, let's say there's an indie developer or AA studio listening to this, like what is something that we feel like we haven't spent much time on that you'd like to speak on? Maybe leave them something with to think about.
I think if anyone's listening as a game in development or is thinking about how they're going to market their game, I would really encourage them to think about how long they're going to be doing that for. I think a lot of games businesses get stuck in this. I'm going to start my media campaign kind of 6 months out and then just buy attention. I think there's a lot of research around anticipation and savoring that's been out, not just within the games space, but we can all probably empathize with that. You know, it's midweek while we're recording this now. I'm sure that the weekend that's upcoming and what our plans will be, there is anticipation towards that. And when it comes, it will be sweet. But the academic research says that when we anticipate and savor something, we have a better experience. We have a deeper experience. We engage with it at a more emotional level. And when we engage with things at a more emotional level, we're more likely to do the most important form of marketing, which is telling people in our social network about it. So better experiences drive advocacy, and that advocacy loop of I tell my friends, they tell their friends, builds a longer tail for a marketing campaign as well. So I would really encourage anyone who's thinking about when they're going to go into early access or when they're going to go into a 1.0, not just what is the new content that you're putting in the game at each of these patches and updates, but what's the story that you're telling of who wrote the music, who's doing the combat design, the voice actors, finding these brilliant basics that a lot of people do through dev diaries, but actually letting them have their own space and time of day in the marketing campaign to let people build in a one-to-one connection with you and the story that you're trying to tell and the game that you're trying to make. If you can make that personal soul connection in terms of intent and aspiration, I think that you'll do much better. And that's why we see so many smaller teams, smaller studios with a really strong clarity of purpose having games that absolutely blow up at the moment, because they're not trying to play to the middle. They're not doing the mass market thing that a lot of AAA studios are going, where they're making a game for everyone and therefore making a game for no one. So that's where I'd recommend that you start.
Yeah. I don't know if you've seen Mojang. They started, I don't know who they hired, but like their YouTube Shorts game is so freaking good right now. And they have exactly what you're saying, like the dev diaries. And they like did the recent Copper Golem release. Don't know if you followed.
No, but like, I've not seen it.
The day they released it, they did a short and they explained why they made it. We came back and then it just had the person who developed it explain the reasoning and why he enjoys the way it's done. And then it had the artist explain how it made it. And then like basically all the engagements like, holy shit, finally, amazing. And you can definitely see like, if you could measure positive sentiment, it was like, ding.
Yeah.
And, like, and it was like a 2-day thing. So it was like, oh, now it's out on Bedrock, Java soon or what have you. And from seeing some Kickstarter campaigns, there was one that had broomsticks and witches on broomsticks, like a racing game. but like they funded the whole game through a Kickstarter. And if you noticed, all the promotion they did was essentially just the devs explaining, here's our plan, here's what we do, here's the team. It was very much like person led. And to your point, you mentioned about like savoring the moment. And yeah, for sure. Like, when you go on a holiday and then every day you forget what you booked for that day and you just show up and do it. I don't know why, but it's just not as exciting as if you just have like, when I was a kid, every year we go to the water park. I was like, I remember one time we were going to go. It cost like 20 quid to go there. I never knew how much it cost, but I always felt like it was really expensive for some reason. And then everyone's like 7 days to water, 6 days to water. And then the day I go there, it's like, and it's like, boom, I'm in there. But now it's just like, I'm going to Water World. And it's just like a switch. And the enjoyment, obviously I'm older, but like, it's not the same. And I feel like GTA 6 is going to be like this big, like, wow moment, because it's like everyone's been waiting. And I can imagine you want to create that if you can, proactively.
The anticipation thing, I'm not going to sit here and say that it's bulletproof, because sometimes having expectations for something means that whatever you're looking forward to can actually crumble.
Yeah, there's risk.
Crumble under the pressure, like you see kind of the hype trains of Cyberpunk getting completely out of control versus what was actually delivered on launch. Expectations in general in life can sometimes kind of get in the way of you just being present in the moment as well. But if that's us as individuals, if you're trying to tell a story, if you're trying to get people to buy into what you're making, then you need to leave these breadcrumbs as you go. I haven't been to a water park in many years. This is the sign. Next holiday, Speedo's on.
The UK is doing this new one, aren't they? They're doing like that big theme park.
I'm not seeing it.
No, it's okay, cool. Joe, really appreciate this conversation. If someone's listened to this and they want to get in touch, how would be the best way to do that?
Yeah, so always reach out to me on LinkedIn, Joe Hills, and then you can go to the Once Upon a Time website, which is onceuponatime.agency. See all the cool stuff that we've done. And if you're going to go to Gamescom, or if you're going to go to DICE Europe, or if you're going to go to Reboot next year, or if you're going to go to Develop Brighton next year, and you see me, just come and say hi.
Beautiful. Joe, thanks so much.
Thank you. See ya.